and welcome to another episode of My Jig and I. Hello, Denise.
Hello, Anita. Hello, listeners. Thank you for tuning in. So, Anita, what are we talking about today?
Well, today we certainly have a special guest that will be addressing the race issues that's taking place in Great Britain. And Denise, you're gonna do that interview. I think this interview will be quite informative as to what Megan is going through right now in Great Britain with the racism, and hopefully Dr. Alexander, which is our guest, will be able to shed a light on exactly what is taking place in Britain, where they are, and what they have to do. And in terms of the Commonwealth, I think hopefully you and Dr. Alexander will get into that conversation where the people from the Commonwealth knows exactly what is going on. So I'm really excited about it, and it's just always nice to have a guest on. Okay, Denise, so take it away.
We have a very special guest, Dr. Alexander, and I will allow Dr. Alexander to introduce himself and tell a little bit about his background.
Good afternoon. My name is Dr. Alexander and I reside in the UK at the moment. I'll tell you a little bit more about my situation here in the UK, but I'd like to start first of all in talking to you about my early years. I was born in the UK in Fulham in 1957. My parents moved to Jamaica when I was approximately 10 years old, where I went to a state school and did the usual sort of things, GCSEs, I should say, actually taking us back a bit, GCEs, and attained a fairly decent education as a youngster. However, what is significant about my early childhood is that I was actually, as I said, born in the UK. However, my parents were probably about the age of about 8 or 9, found it difficult to get me into a school in this country, partly because I was classified as what was then called an ESN child, which meant educationally subnormal. Now, this is not something that people talk about very often, even in the UK, but it basically means that I was classified as having a below average learning ability. I was sent to see a psychiatrist 2 or 3 times a week, where I can certainly remember a very Freudian setup where I would lie on a chaise lounge chair. I'd be given lots of squares and lots of circles and various other objects to place in order, and then told, then I would get a lollipop and told that I was a good boy if I did well. Ironically, my father, who was relatively uneducated man, my mother was a nurse, decided around about that time that somehow something wasn't quite right. My father always wanted to own his own business, and so he, having struggled to, I think was expelled from school by that age, or on the verge of being excluded, if I remember right, and my parents decided to move back to Jamaica so that I could get a decent education and we could all go to school and my parents could develop a business there. What's interesting is that I went to state school there, I went to university, and I came back to the UK sometime around about 1980. And what should be noted by that introductory story is that had my parents not moved back to the UK, moved back to Jamaica, I probably would have had a below par education, which probably would have meant that I would have been taught as someone who was incapable of functioning in a normal way within society. So that sets the scene for much of my personal and political development, in that the roots of that were that my early experiences of racism, about how black children were discriminated and classified at that time, because I never really understood that till I started to study later on in life. And there's a West Indian novelist called Bernard Corn, who wrote a book called How the West Indian Child is Made ESN in the British School System. And it wasn't until I picked that book up many, many years later in the early 80s that I actually began to make a clear connection with what had happened to me and my parents' move to Jamaica, and the impact that some of the decisions that were being made at that time about black children, the impact that this had on me.
Wow. So, Dr. Alexander, that is quite a story. And now that you've been back in the UK for over a decade or more, or several decades, I was wondering, has anything changed since you were a child?
If I'm honest, I would say there have been changes, some positive changes and some changes that I think mean that we still have a long way to go. I think the context of racism is far different. When I first came back to the UK, it was quite common for people to scream obscenities to black people. We had stop and search on the street, which is primarily targeted at black young people in this country. Black children are being excluded from school at an almost alarming rate. We had people being denied opportunities here. It was pretty awful, particularly during the Thatcherite years. And it kind of set the seeds of what was to continue. I think that when I say some things have changed, I think there's less of a kind of overt behaviour in terms of racist behaviour. But I think what is very clear is that there is an undercurrent, an underbelly of how people react and discriminate in ways which are very, very different. And what I would say is far more sophisticated in their approach to race. So, for argument's sake, nobody's going to call you
the N-word. Yeah.
But it's very clear that by all sorts of decisions which are made on an everyday basis that you are treated like one of those, that N-word.
Okay.
To give you an example, we have situations here where you have people applying for jobs, and we have many people from all over the world, sometimes with various surnames that don't match not traditionally British names. Now, I happen to have a very traditional British name, but you have many people who have surnames which are non-traditionally British, and we have those people at times been proven that they've been discriminated from jobs, not because you've actually got somebody's interviewed you and decided whether or not you're able or capable, but because certainly weeded out the foreigners in terms of references of name and culture. And that is a kind of bias that has been built into the system for a long, long time. It's actually quite sophisticated in terms of the way it works.
Oh, exactly. So it's been hidden somewhat under the rug and camouflaged so that people cannot recognize the blatant racism that is happening.
Absolutely. And that's something that people struggle with. I think more increasingly people are beginning to become aware of it. Certainly the people who are impacted by it, and people of colour, are aware of it. And dare I say that many other people who are supporters of people of colour in this country that are aware of it too. But I think in terms of how the media perception of black people, the media reporting of black people, institutions, in terms of how they seek to discriminate against black people, it is as rampant as it ever was at any time in our history in this country.
Oh, wow. So have you been personally targeted, Dr. Alexander?
I wouldn't say I've been personally targeted, but I certainly have lots of experiences that lead me to feel uncomfortable about the way I'm treated. For argument's sake, I find as someone of colour, I turn up at a university and I can be, sometimes if the security don't know me, I'm denied access. Not in the way that my white colleagues are treated. My white colleagues can go into places and have free access within institutions or within certain places. I feel that there's a conscious or unconscious bias against me within this system. And that isn't that I have a chip on my shoulder. I feel quite comfortable with who I am. I feel comfortable as a person. However, I am aware that even for those of us who might consider ourselves to be educationally privileged, that there is discrimination at hand.
Okay. Now, are there any groups over there, such as here in the States, we have the NAACP, who's often the voice for many people of color? Are there any groups in the UK that can advocate for people of color over there?
No, unlike the US, we don't have any particular groups. We have lots of small groups that will speak up at times. We have, David Lammy, who's an MP, and others who will raise issues within Parliament, and we have councillors that will raise issues, and we sometimes, and dare I say, black and white councillors and MPs that will raise issues. But we don't really have a strong campaigning or strong vocal point for those things. Often things come up around flashpoints. There are times when there are flashpoints that people will speak up because, for example, there's a real issue at the moment in the country with issues around knife crime, and they wanted to bring back in some measures which are stop and search, which actually means they stop people on the street. However, this stop and search has always traditionally only ever targeted black young people. And
Okay.
so people have actually started to speak out against that. Not about stop and search as it's in itself, but about the fact that the focus of that is only on, often seems to be 90% of it on black young people.
Okay, so it's yeah. I remember in the U.S. Years ago they had something similar, the stop and search. It was really in New York, and I think it's been somewhat outlawed now. But they've still found a way to continue to target, especially young black men, and they're the ones that's actually been thrown in prison oftentimes for no real reason. So I see a similar situation happening, or hopefully it will be averted there in the UK now. That's really something. So it's sad that there is that up till now there are no national NAACP type group over there. I think do you know if there are any plans in the making to create an organization like that?
I don't know if there are any plans in the making, and there may well be groups out there that I don't know about, but certainly we don't have any strong, like the NAACP in America, we don't have any real strong groups that's a coalition that's clearly identified as picking up an agenda around challenging the system and the status quo in relation to its approach to race and discrimination in this country. We don't have any large body that seems to communicate that. As I said, it's mainly been done through small groups of people, sometimes through the church occasionally, but very rarely, but mainly picked up in Parliament through MPs and picked up through concerned individuals, which tends to be okay, but it tends to personalise issues and become one that just feels like, people just, they've got a chip on their shoulder, or they're angry, rather than actually seeing it as something which is systemic and actually part of a structured and organised approach here in terms of institutional racism and discrimination for people of colour.
Okay, and so that's basically how the British people have been able to get away with it for centuries. I'm hoping that now that the world is actually paying attention to the blatant racism in the UK, that hopefully these small groups will come together to form a larger group, because I think it's so important, especially in the 21st century, that people of color over there do have some sort of a representation on a national level. The other thing that I see that will eventually become a problem with Brexit, I call it the Brexit debacle that's about to happen. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, the UK will be turning towards the Commonwealth countries for support, especially with trade and different things. And now with the Commonwealth quite aware of the blatant racism over there, where do what do you think, how do you think that, that will be affected?
If I'm honest, I'm unsure about that. I think the difficulty is that I don't think that many people from the Commonwealth, I think this issue is, I wouldn't say it's relatively new. I think many people who live in the Commonwealth are aware from historical stories or things they've heard. But in terms of you talk about the Commonwealth as a trading bloc, I think it's obvious that Britain is going to have to seek to develop much more greater partnerships with countries and blocs all over the world. But let me just make one thing clear. One of the interesting things, a few years ago, under the EU rules, I think it was St Kitts and St Nevis, and someone correct me, I might be wrong, sole trade was that they traded in bananas. What was interesting is that that overnight their bananas the EU decided not to buy their bananas because they were the wrong shape. It's made headlines in this country as a bit of a joke. But the irony of it wiped out the whole industry there. Terms of this small island producing bananas, it just overnight wiped out their whole industry and their main source, their main economic, their main sources of revenue and trade. So my thinking is that yes, UK will seek to develop greater links with the islands as they were, in terms of as a trading. But the irony is, we don't really have a trading bloc within the Commonwealth, and that's something that I think as black people, people of colour, we have to be more savvy about. We need to create a trading bloc, as in like they have within Europe, that negotiates on behalf of the islands there.
Okay.
So coming together, so rather than actually being able to negotiate individual arrangements with individual islands, we actually have something that resembles a trading bloc there that we can actually do something. So I think that that's where I think could be interesting to see what the developments are that take place around that. I think that's something that I would be encouraging many of the Commonwealth countries, and not all of them are, dare I say, not all of them are black either, but to encourage a trading bloc that can negotiate a position, not just with the UK, but across Europe.
Okay, yeah, because there are certainly 53 members of the Commonwealth countries now, and I think there may be a couple of other countries that's trying to negotiate to become a part of the Commonwealth. And yes, you're absolutely right. I hope, in light of everything now that's coming to the surface, that the leaders of the Commonwealth will now sit down and really think about the future, especially the future of the young people who will eventually become leaders there. And I know this program, My Duke and I know there are many people in different Commonwealth countries that listen to this, and I would say on behalf of all people of color, please listen to Dr. Alexander, because this is really serious, it's important, and I think, again, considering the colonial history of the United Kingdom, it would be really sad to see the UK just sort of pick up where it left off before and continue to treat people of color with the same racist behavior that they've done for over a century now. And mind you, a good portion of the population in the UK, they're from the Commonwealth countries.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, so this is important. And again, asking you about the NAACP, I don't know if the people there, especially people of color from the Commonwealth, if they have thought about maybe organizing themselves to have a collective voice speak on their behalf, because I know many people that are suffering from the blatant racism and underbelly now, even some that was some are from the Windrush population time. I think it's important that they come together and try to address some of these problems.
I think you're right, but I think one of the difficulties is that the NAACP in America has evolved out of the civil rights struggle and the civil rights movement, and I think therein lies the difference. We've not had that kind of movement in this country, and I think if you look at the history of the NAACP, that's where it was born, out of the need to have a voice and a collective voice for black people in America. We've never had that in that way here, so we've never had anything that kind of uniforms us collectively. As I said, we've had times when there have been things that have happened. We've had riots in this country even, and we've had different parts of the country come together to speak about the riots or what's happening, discrimination in particular areas. But we don't have a body of people and a group that is identified as clearly having a voice that represents people of colour across Britain. And I do think that is something that we really do need to look at some point in the future.
Yes.
Not really immediately, actually, dare I say in the future immediately.
Yeah, immediately, yeah, because therein lies the problem. There's a whole generation of young people that's there now, they're British citizens, but they have no real voice. And yeah, that's definitely a problem, and hopefully someone will step up to the plate. Maybe one of these MPs can step up to the plate and begin to organize, especially the youth, who will be the future adults of tomorrow, and help them to get organized and have some representation. Because after all, the UK is no longer an all-white country. it's a mixed country.
Absolutely. But I wanted to make one thing clear. If you look at the way the NACCP in America has evolved, you still have, like us, equal amounts of racism and discrimination which is taking place currently and taking place historically. And so it's not a panacea. So for me, I want to make it quite clear that I don't actually think that just by having a voice, I think it's important that we have a collective voice, a uniform voice that can speak with one voice, or as near as damn it, on behalf of people of colour, black people in this country. But I think it's very different. We need to be careful that we don't just lumber such a group with the responsibility for dealing with all the ills of society, because as we've seen in America, as we've seen other places around the world, that just having that alone doesn't necessarily automatically bring about change. Change is also too painful, and there is struggle.
Yeah.
Real serious struggles to have.
Yes.
To continue to have.
Absolutely. The only difference is in America, when blatant racism like that happens, in America, people are able to call it out. They don't try to sugarcoat it or sweep it under the rug. For instance, the leader of America has been saying a lot of awful racist things, and the people here are not intimidated or feel afraid to speak out against it. And I think in a society, when you're able to openly speak out against some of the ills, that's a part of, I guess, the healing process, and that's a part of, that can be the beginning of addressing the problems. And I think, and I think over the years, that is what has happened to America. Yes, America still has a very long way to go, and with the current leader, it seems as if a lot of things have been, have taken a step backwards, 50 step backwards. But we're also reminded that America did elect its first black president, and hopefully there will be many more to come. There are still a lot of issues that needs to be addressed. The clock, in some ways, being rolled back by the current leader, but hopefully that won't be the norm. And I know many people are speaking out now, and they refuse to accept that as the norm. So in light of that, I think the UK still has to get to that point where people of color, black people, are not afraid to speak out about the racism that's happening, not just for themselves, but within the society, and feel ostracized because they've voiced their opinion. So I guess in that respect, that's one of the big difference between racism in the UK and racism in America. Over here, we can openly speak about it. In the UK, people seem to be afraid to even mention the word. Am I correct?
I don't think that's entirely true, but I do think you're right. I do think people are far more reserved about speaking. That's also too partly about British culture, but it's also too that people do seem to almost not want to talk about it. And so it doesn't mean that people don't see it and people aren't aware, but I think that sometimes you have to empower people to have a voice.
Right.
That's quite important, that people feel empowered and emboldened to speak up about ills, wrongs at all levels of society. So I think you're right, but I don't think I don't think that people just don't talk. I think there's a kind of reluctance to really want to acknowledge certain things are going on at times.
Okay.
But certainly within the black community, it's talked about. I can assure you that.
Yeah.
Assure you of that.
Okay. Yeah. But I guess when I just speak about it, I meant openly in public, whether to Parliament or the government, for lack of a better term.
It's making those political connections that you have the links, and traditionally the links here have been our politicians.
Okay.
That's traditionally the route in. So you'll have people like your David Lammy and others who will speak up on behalf of black people and raise issues of concern within Parliament. He's not the only one. There's Diane Abbott, and there are other parliamentarians that will do those things occasionally, but it's a wide agenda. And again, as much as it's important to have those people speaking on our behalf, we shouldn't labour them with the responsibility of them being the sole voice.
Right.
I think the point you raised earlier on about having a collective voice, a uniform voice outside of that kind of parliamentary system is important, because the other thing here too is that those people not only represent black people in their communities, they represent white members too of their communities.
Okay. Yeah, that's a really good point. Well, I hope that this is the beginning of a conversation over there, and I know a lot of people of color over there can pay attention to what's going on in America and perhaps learn some lessons from everything that's going on here. While America still has a long way to go, I think some of the experiences that Black America have gone through will certainly teach a lot of people how to avoid some of the pitfalls and maybe how to move forward in this situation.
I hope so too.
Yeah.
I hope so too.
Well, is there anything else? Well, I'll ask you one more thing before I let you go, Dr. Alexander. I know your time is very busy. Are there any lessons that you that the people, especially the Commonwealth countries where they're people of color, are there any lessons that you think that they can take from this or learn from what's going on now that could maybe help the 35 and under population?
Help what? Sorry, I missed that. Sorry.
No, I said, are there any lessons that the Commonwealth countries, that's at least 95% people of color, can learn from what's going on in the UK at this time, as far as organizing themselves to...
Well, I think there's two things. The first one is that they recognise that Britain is not just a panacea of greatness, and one of the things, the myths that people are taught in the Caribbean or understand in terms of Commonwealth countries is that somehow that, well, I said Commonwealth is, well, Commonwealth, as I said, wider than just the Caribbean, but people buy into this myth that Britain is just a place paved with gold and honey. Living in this society is a struggle, and sometimes not to kind of set the westernized cultures like Britain up as a kind of like utopia. It is hard to live here, it's hard to reside here. It doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities, but to also recognize that your land, your homeland, to offer opportunities too, and to find ways to be creative economically, and to evolve social practices which are inclusive, which ensure that the countries of the Commonwealth actually survive in a way that's equitable, that people are included no matter what social or economic strata they happen to fall within. So I think that's an important one. The second one is that collectivity. For all of the Commonwealth, that coming together is something that I can remember during, I think it was about early 50s, when I think they had I can't remember, I'll come back on again, I'll get my facts together, but
Okay.
They did have Jamaica and a number of other islands sought to come up with just before Jamaica independence, come up with a trading bloc for the Caribbean, which didn't, for whatever reason, didn't quite work. It fell apart early days, but I think in ensuring that we have a way of collectively holding together and giving us strength in terms of how we trade, in terms of creating those trading blocks, in terms of creating opportunities for people to have to exploit and explore opportunities from the Caribbean. So if you're in the Caribbean and you say you're manufacturing chairs, just as an example, and you're looking for a market for your chairs, rather than just trying to sell your chairs individually to some country in Britain or Europe, why not actually have a trading block which can negotiate a proper trading deal on your behalf, a network of production and a system that means that it's systematic and long term. And I think that's the kind of lessons that I think we need to learn overall.
Absolutely. I think China has been successfully done that, and I think there's at least one or two African countries that's currently in the process of doing that for local markets. So that's absolutely a great point, a very important point, and I hope that next year, I think it's 2020, when all of the Commonwealth leaders will get together at a conference in Rwanda, that they will be able to address some of these problems, and as you say, do come up with some sort of a trade bloc where they're negotiating different things, so that the people of their countries are not being taken advantage of, and they're given their rightful place in, on the world stage and in the world market. That's a really excellent point.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
So,
and I hope we get a chance to come on again and maybe share a few more ideas.
yes, Dr. Alexander, this has been a pleasure speaking to you, and I know you're a busy man. I thank you so very much for taking time out of your schedule to speak to our listeners out there on My Duke and I. And on that note, I will say again, thank you and adieu to all of our listeners. Thank you.